Anytime two opponents see each other again, things are always just a little bit different. But this third go around, the Washington Commanders offense looks a lot different thanks to the rise of Dyami Brown. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, also helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team this year. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I appreciate you coming through for today's episode. If you're an everydayer, I want to give you a special thank you for coming through every single day. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, in which we're going to hear from former Washington tight end Vernon Davis. We're going to answer some trench questions from our insiders, and we're going to talk about first Dyami Brown becoming a real problem for the Philadelphia Eagles. And we're going to do all of that thanks to Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use a promo code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL, to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. And our lessons learned episode. This is our Wednesday episode, lessons learned mailbag episode. We're going to talk about three things that we learned from the divisional round against the Detroit Lions. We're going to get to three questions from our insiders. And then, of course, like I said, we're going to talk to Vernon Davis here at the end of this episode. The first thing that we learned in Detroit is that playoff Dyami is very real. We've been talking about playoff Dyami just a little bit here this week. Dyami Brown obviously having a great game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So then the question was, could he stack those games and have another great game against the Detroit Lions? Well, he absolutely did that, and that is what earned him the nickname from me from this show, Playoff Dyami. I don't know if it's going to stick. It's a throwback to playoff Lenny when Leonard Fournette just exploded in the postseason for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and helped take that team to a Super Bowl win in the 2020 NFL season. So I wanted to bring it back there, a little bit of nostalgia there, Playoff Dyami, plus really super proud for Dyami. But how effective has Dyami Brown really been? I wanted to go ahead and put a historical context to the tear that Dyami Brown has been on. Over the last two playoff games, Dyami Brown has 11 catches, 187 yards, and a touchdown in two playoff games, his first two career playoff games. If you were to extrapolate that data over a 17-game season, Dyami Brown would be on pace to have 93 catches, 1,589 yards of offense, and 8 touchdowns. Now, I'm not here to say right now, draft him in the third round of your fantasy leagues next year. He's going to produce all those yards next season for the Washington Commanders. But I just wanted to give you a vision. When you sit here, you say, man, Dyami Brown is really blowing up. That is an understatement. That is the type of quote unquote season he is producing in these last two games. In the history of the National Football League, only 23 receivers have had that stat line that Dyami Brown is on pace to produce. Again, he doesn't have 17 games, so he can't produce it, but just on that pass, right? Michael Thomas at the top of that list, Cooper Kupp in 2021, Marvin Harrison in 2002. The closest person that's had that stat line that's the closest to what Dyami is doing, 2001 David Boston, 98 catches, 1,598 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was a Pro Bowler and a first-team All-Pro. So right now, Dyami Brown is producing at the clip of a Pro Bowl first-team All-Pro level. Absolutely amazing ball being played by Dyami Brown. According to Next Gen Stats, Brown has 50 or more yards on passes targeting him 10-plus yards downfield in 3 of his last 4 games dating back to the regular season. He did it just once in his first 61 career games. So Dyami Brown absolutely rising up. And look, that is a problem for the Philadelphia Eagles, because think about it. When the Philadelphia Eagles went up against Washington Commanders the first time, it was all about isolate Terry McLaurin, keep him from doing damage, and you're going to be fine. Second time around, Cliff Kingsbury's offense, a little bit more developed, a little bit more diagnosed, and they were trying to bring some more pressure on Jayden. We'll get to that here in just a second. And the Commanders were able to get the win there, but it wasn't like you just had this evolution of another receiver. Now you got this situation if you're the Philadelphia Eagles where you've got to wonder how much of a role is Dyami Brown really going to play in this game plan, because they also saw Jamison Crowder. They still have Olamide Zaccheaus. These are guys that have stepped up in the past before. So if you come out and you've got to study this kid, I mean, this kid can't be putting up 98 catch, 1,500 yard, 8 touchdown pace numbers and not get attention from the Philadelphia Eagles. If you don't pay attention to him, he's going to burn you just like he burned the Lions, just like he burned the Bucs. If you do pay attention to him, now you're just going to open up more things in the middle for a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus, Jameson Crowder, Zach Ertz, or these running backs in the passing game. So you absolutely love, if you're a Commanders fan, that this problem is on the table for the Philadelphia Eagles. The second thing that we learned, Jayden Daniels loves pressure. And you might be scratching your head and say, David, we already knew that. And we already know that. This is my little excuse way to really kind of drive the point home. Against the Detroit Lions, Jayden Daniels, 12 for 16 against the blitz, 191 yards and a touchdown. Again, next-gen stats coming through for us. Second most passing yards against the blitz by a rookie in a game since 2016. That's regular and postseason. The Lions blitz Daniels 1% of the time, the second highest blitz rate he has faced all year long. He has a 114.7 passer rating in the regular season against the blitz. So you blitz Jayden Daniels at your own peril. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles blitz Jayden Daniels 12.5% of the time in week 11, not very much. But then they ramped it up to 35.6% in week 16. They sacked him 4 times total, 3 in the first game where they didn't blitz him hardly at all, once in the game where they blitzed him, 35% of the time, over 35% of the time. So what do I anticipate from Vic Fangio this week? Probably somewhere more in the range of like 22% blitz packages, right? You're not going to go all the way back down, but you're certainly not going to stay up there because Jayden Daniels is going to pick you apart. But why won't the Eagles just go back to no pressure? Because if they do, while Cliff Kingsbury wasn't really ready for what the Eagles were going to do about Terry McLaurin in week 1, he was certainly ready the next game, and he was certainly ready. He got ready again. I mean, they lost to the Cowboys, but we've seen Cliff Kingsbury, the evolution of Cliff Kingsbury's offense, especially as it relates to Terry McLaurin. Because even if Terry lines up split wide left 70% of the time in a game, the route combinations are moving him inside. The motion is distracting from defenses and giving the quarterback an advantage here. So there are things that Cliff Kingsbury is doing, not always just moving where Terry is lining up to get Terry free. That is not the same thing that the Philadelphia Eagles saw before. Additionally, the first time they played, Jayden went to the left side of the field minimally. Just 8 passes went outside the left hash. Only 1 went outside the left side numbers. Week 16 against Philly was similar, but every other week since that first Philadelphia game, Jayden spread. His ball distribution, right side, left side, middle of the field, has gotten a lot better. So how much of that is due to what the Eagles do? Not much. Part of it may be respect for Quinn Mitchell, who certainly has earned some this rookie season, but Cliff Kingsbury dialed up a lot of quick hitters to the right side to protect his offensive line. I'm assuming Jayden is also naturally more comfortable throwing to the middle, to the right side of the field. And in the past month, we've seen him get comfortable throwing to the left side of the field. So I suspect we'll see some things dialed up to the left side of the field. When you talk about what haven't the Eagles seen from this Commanders offense, it's throwing to that left side of the field. So if Vic Fangio wants to bring about 20% pressure or so, Jayden is obviously very comfortable in it. The more attention they have to pay to a guy like Dyami Brown on the right side, or Terry when he's over there, opens up avenues for Jayden to throw on the left. And we've seen him getting more comfortable throwing to that side of the field as well. Third thing, no venue too high. We already know that the Washington Commanders have the saying, anybody, anytime, anywhere. Well, they proved it. The Detroit Lions Stadium, telling you guys right now, up until about midway through the third quarter, had delivered on every single thing we expected. It was loud, it was raucous, it was hostile, it was all of those things. And Jayden Daniels and his Commanders team did not flinch. Well, guess what? They've been in Link before. And I know it's playoff Link, but it's still the Link. And it's not as raucous. I mean, it's more rude than the Ford Field, right? But it's not as loud. It's not as intimidating as that Lions crowd can be. I promise you that. So anybody, anytime, anywhere, certainly being proven in the actions by the Washington Commanders. However, what are they going to do in the trenches? We got a lot of questions about what to do on the offensive and defensive line, both this weekend and even moving forward. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers to FanDuel, you can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. In fact, they've even got a fun side bet game, the Kick of Destiny 3. Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, one of the Manning brothers is going to make the kick of destiny. You pick which Manning brother you think is going to make the kick, and if you're right, you get to split a pot of $10 million in bonus bets. It's free to play right now at FanDuel. So go to FanDuel.com, join today, and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. What are the Washington Commanders going to do in the trenches this weekend and even moving forward just a little bit? Those are questions that the insiders came through. We're going to answer here on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. And if you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, you can sign up to be an insider today by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you're going to get direct information, inside information from me during practices, games, press conferences, all the like. And you're also going to get exclusive access to our insider-only Zoom conferences where we get together and shoot the breeze about everything, about the same thing that we all want to see, and that is Commanders winning football games. So again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. If you like it, stick around. I like mailbags. Our insiders come through with some really great questions. If you're sitting here and you're an insider saying, man, I missed the mailbag opening up this week, darn it. Well, don't worry. I didn't actually open up the mailbag this week because we already had a good amount of mailbag questions that only became more applicable with Sam Cosmi going down. So we've got some trench questions from the insiders that I had stashed away for a rainy day that we're going to use today. Tia came through and asked, could they try Brandon Coleman at guard? It's an interesting question, both for this weekend and for the long term. So in theory, Brandon Coleman, he played guard at TCU, right? Played a lot of positions at TCU. Could Brandon Coleman play guard in the National Football League? I think absolutely, yes, he could. Now, Mikey Sandersell, obviously the most popular rookie who switched positions, went from slot corner to outside corner, did really well. Brandon Coleman has obviously been at left tackle his entire time he's started for the Washington Commanders, did play some right tackle for the Washington Commanders as well. With Sam Cosmi out, is there a potential that Brandon Coleman could play this weekend at right guard and Cornelius Lucas could play left tackle? I don't believe so. I think it's probably going to be Trent Scott, Michael Dieter, someone like that filling in that right guard position, but is not necessarily an uninteresting prospect to think about. And honestly, if you're the Washington Commanders, you might just throw Brandon Coleman into some right guard reps, individual reps during the team drills or during the individual position group drills for us, the media, to see, photograph, tweet about, and talk about, because it gives the Philadelphia Eagles just a little bit more to think about. The idea of Brandon Coleman being the right guard and Cornelius Lucas being the left tackle. I don't know if they're going to do it. I don't know if they'll go to that level of gamesmanship. But again, I don't believe it's going to happen, but I don't think it's necessarily an idea that should just be washed down the drain and not even considered. So good question there coming from Tia. Bill came through. One of the most important players on the team is center Tyler Biadasz. It's more than just calling the plays for Biadasz that raises the efficiency of the offensive line. The level of blocking talent is exponential between him and Michael Dieter. Once you get past training camp, are fundamentals worked on during weekly practices, or are the players and coaches just too busy with game planning? So great question, Bill. And I would tell you, with every staff, it's a little bit different. With this staff, it's a little bit of both. So this staff, you might remember going all the way back to training camp, they provide these players, I can't even remember, I think it's like EPP or something like that. They provide these players with an extra period to where that is their time to work on their notes. So the coaching staff gives each player notes. So they go to David Harrison and they say, hey man, your notes is you need to work on, sometimes you talk too fast and it's hard to keep up with what you're saying. So we want you to work on that. So in your extra period after practice, we're going to allot a little bit of time for you to work on yourself. That's what we want you to work on. Now, I've got a position coach that I can say, hey coach, can you help me out working on this? I've got teammates. I've got drills that I know how to do. I've got things that I know I need to do. So it's up to the player on how they kind of go about doing that. Some of them will, again, lean on peer leadership, peer mentorship. Some of them will go to their position coach. And we've seen, you go all the way back to that clip of Emmanuel Forbes in training camp, working with the DB's coach, getting off the line of scrimmage with his toes and all that stuff in the right position. Those are the types of things that these guys have to work on. So yes, there's some individual development, whereas the coaches are saying, hey, you as an individual, whether it be Tyler Biadasz or anybody else, this is where we need you to focus in on your personal development, self-development. And then they have a period where they're allowed to do that. However, the coaches don't just kind of come out here specifically and say, okay, today we're all working on Nick Allegretti getting better at X, if that makes sense. So, and that's just, again, from what we can see, there's a lot that goes on behind closed doors that we don't get to see. So I don't know all of the entire picture, but from what we see up front, that is something that this staff is certainly developing or certainly focused on, is giving these players the opportunity to develop, which, again, some of them take better advantage of it than others. And that's going to be every employee for every organization. But again, another great question there from the mailbag. Dr. Wonderful came through and said in his opening press conference, Dan Quinn talked about learning from his mistakes in Atlanta and Dallas, like not having a succession plan for offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan after he left. While I do believe DQ has learned from this, he has several people who could be offensive coordinators should Cliff leave. He hasn't learned from the defensive struggles Dallas faced against the run. They're thin through the middle. That doesn't work for playoff football. They drafted Johnny Newton, a smaller guy. What hasn't Quinn learned through importance of stopping the run? Why hasn't the scheme changed? End quote. So, yeah, it's really kind of interesting because you're right. Johnny Newton, smaller dude, not the run stopper, the gap filler that you need against a team that's run heavy like the Philadelphia Eagles, stuff like that. However, I don't know there's necessarily a sign that Dan Quinn hasn't learned from his experience in Dallas, because remember, he inherited Dan Quinn. He inherited Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Fedarian Mathis, and even John Ridgeway, 4 guys that were bigger. Now, John Ridgeway did slim down a little bit before this season, but he inherited 4 guys that, in theory, from their build, their makeup, Daron Payne's a little bit more of a compact type player. Not small, but certainly more compact than like a John Allen or a Fedarian Mathis was. But he inherited these guys that were, quote unquote, bigger. And I think what you see this roster go after is, okay, where are we deficient? We're deficient in speed off the line of scrimmage, in our pass rush sets, and all these things. That's where Johnny Newton comes in. And where are we not deficient? We're not deficient in size. Now, the key is, let's see how this size fits the scheme, fits our coaching, fits our mentality. And clearly, Fedarian Mathis didn't fit. Clearly, John Ridgeway, a player that they had in Dallas, so they actually waived at one point in time, still didn't fit. Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. Look, Jonathan Allen got a lot of praise for his last game performance. I think that's great. Daron Payne certainly had his moments as well. I think overall, most people are not necessarily wowed by either of their overall performances. John did miss a lot of time with that torn pec, so there's a little bit of a grain of salt there. But I think overall, you look at the middle of the defensive line, and they inherited a lot of people who, from a physical standpoint, from a measurement standpoint, could have the opportunity to fit. And again, because you're paying these guys so much money, you need to kind of understand, is it really somebody, is John Allen, is Daron Payne, is Fedarian Mathis going to be someone that we want to stick with through the long haul? And the only way to find that out is to go out there and play them. If you have a John Allen, Daron Payne, Fedarian Mathis, and you go draft another big body defensive tackle in the second round versus a Johnny Newton in the second round, the great news is you might find a better big body guy, but you're still speed deficient on the defensive line. And that's where they wanted to kind of address it. So I wouldn't necessarily say because of this first year, because you're absolutely right that this team's run defense has not been great. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that. The run defense up the middle specifically has not been good. The pressure up the middle has not been good all year long. I wouldn't say that this 1 year is indicative of Dan Quinn, Joe Wade Jr. not learning from their lessons. Now, if they decide John Allen's not the way to go, they decide Daron Payne's not the way to go, then they don't address it, then we can talk about them not learning those lessons from their experiences in Dallas and before that. You know what I mean? Like, these guys have coached in multiple different spots and certainly has seen the opportunity to have these problems or have these problems fixed even. So I would expect, basically, the way I'm telling you this, basically, I would expect to see, some adjustments there. We saw Carl Davis called up from the practice squad, and you talked to Dan Quinn about why Carl Davis was coming up from the practice squad. He said, right, he's a big dude, but he also plays square. That's a big thing. Having size. If you're a big shoulder dude and you're big up front, and you're massive, you take up a lot of real estate, but then you turn sideways or you get knocked to the ground or whatever, you're no longer taking up that real estate. So it's not enough to just be big. You got to be big and effective. So a guy like Carl Davis, you can see him coming back on the practice squad or even having a chance to make the active roster next year, depending on how they do this roster during the offseason. But yeah, I do expect them to address getting some meatier guys in there that are able to kind of hold at the point of attack and stay squared to the line of scrimmage if they do decide to move on from John Allen and or Daron Payne. If they do that, then I think we can say, okay, they're showing that they're learning from their mistakes and trying to fix this. Whether or not it works, now that's a totally different story, along with everything that goes on with NFL roster building. So great questions from the Mailbag Insiders. I appreciate all of you. Coming up next, we're going to hear from Vernon Davis, 14-year NFL tight end, 2-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion turned actor, who's worked with people such as Morgan Freeman. Love Morgan Freeman, so that's always going to be a cool tidbit to me. We're going to talk about his opinions on the Commanders this season, this playoff season, and who he thinks wins in the NFC Championship game. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be challenging. Well, that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Wrapping up today's episode with our conversation with 14-year NFL tight end, Pro Bowl or Super Bowl champion turned actor, Vernon Davis. Starting off with our conversations about Vernon, or asking Vernon from his initial expectations of Dan Quinn and this new team, how have those expectations been met in this regular season? All right, Vernon, let's go back to the beginning of last year, this time last year, the hiring of Adam Peters and Dan Quinn to come in and help lead this organization. Share with us your expectations back then when those moves were happening compared to what has actually happened this season.
Yeah, so I'm a very optimistic person, and especially when you mix in Magic Johnson in the fold, I felt like it was time. I also felt like we were bringing a wonderful group of people in, someone who really knew how to manage an organization, manage players, because it's the little things that we do that will allow us to be able to have success, right? And it's that goes for anything in life. And I think they've done a great job at managing those little things, setting high expectations, holding everyone accountable, including the players, and just bringing in people that can help them, players that can help them win games pretty much. They made great moves. And, when you make moves like bringing in Jayden Daniels and, just forming players around him, he's one of those guys. He don't really need much. We watched Tom Brady take, players, even when players went down, like when Gronkowski was hurt, when Edelman was hurt, or, he still made it work, right? And Jayden Daniels is one of those guys who can just make things work. Of course, you need a great defense, and what we do have. We have players who are emerging and players who are stepping up, and they just have that mentality right now that you need to have at this moment. This is the Super Bowl they're about to play. Every game in the playoffs should be played like a Super Bowl. But this right here, playing in Philly in a hostile environment, this is going to be the tell right here, right? This game right here is going to say, hey, this is what this team is made of. Mm-hmm. When they win this game, this is what we're getting. This is a championship team right here.
And as you've watched this team grow and as you've heard all the things that Dan Quinn has said and the players have said about DQ, what's kind of stood out about him this season specifically?
Yeah, I think DQ is he's a player's coach, man. He has everything. Like I just said, he kind of reminds me of Harbaugh. When we were going to the playoffs and winning a lot of games, just the way he approaches everything when it comes to the players, organization. He's a likable guy. You want to win for people that you like and people that you love. And that's what these guys are doing. They're rallying behind him and they're believing in everything that he believes in. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's exciting. It's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that part of that excitement, you're a part of the history of this organization. So having been a part of this franchise and some of the good things that it's done, how does it make you feel to see this thing being turned into such a positive direction?
Oh, it feels amazing. It feels amazing because, I wish we had these things in place when I was playing. But, sometimes it takes a change, it's all about changing for the betterment. And that's what we're seeing. We see a group of men who came in here, turned this thing around through structure, through the environment they were able to create with players and staff. So, but that's what we're getting is wonderful to see. And, I'm rooting behind them every step of the way. And when they go to the Super Bowl, I will be right there.
And then you already talked about Jayden Daniels a little bit, but I want to dive into kind of the tight end part of things, right? Like that's your biggest area of expertise, obviously playing in the league for as long as you did. What are some of the things that you see Jayden do that as a tight end, you look at and say, man, I wish I had that quarterback when I was still playing?
Well, I think Jayden is, he does a lot of great things. I mean, he resembles some of the players from the past. I mean, I can think of a few players that he resembles. I mean, he has a little bit of, I can see Russell Wilson. I can see Michael Vick. I can see a lot of different players in this kid. I can also see players like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning when it comes to his instincts, the way he's getting rid of the ball. But he has a lot of different characteristics that make him this special player. And I wish I played with him. I mean, his ability to keep the ball alive, right? Mm-hmm. And that's very important. Those are the type of plays that make the huge plays. And he's very friendly with the ball. He's not focusing on one player. We don't just see Terry McLaurin catching passes. Mm-hmm. We see everyone involved. And that's what it's about. But I wish I had the opportunity to play with the kid, but it's also great watching him from afar.
We talk as we get into this weekend conference championship. Like you mentioned, you got to approach it like it's a Super Bowl. You've been a part of teams that have played in 4 conference championships. Twice, your team was able to win and go to the Super Bowl. Twice, unfortunately, you're on the losing end. But when you look back at those games and those experiences, what are kind of the differences that stand out between the losing side and between the winning side?
I think the difference what's your mentality? What's your focus going into that game, right? What was your level of what was your practice level like? I know when I was playing, whenever the playoffs came around, for some reason, my practice level and my gameplay went to a whole nother place. I was in a space where it didn't matter what you told me. I was going to win every single battle, every single competition. I was in this zone. I was locked in. And I think the team bought into it. We bought into each other. It wasn't just me. It was, you had Patrick Willis, Frank Gore. Everyone had the same mindset. And when you're like that, there's nothing that can stop you. So it's all on what they, their approach when they get out there on that field. That momentum can carry over into the NFC Championship game. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's what it's all about. Those feelings of like just visualizing yourself making plays. I remember visualizing myself making plays the night before, all week leading up to it, because everyone wants to hit that game winning shot, right? We all want the team to come lift us up in the air because we helped to save the day, right? Those are the dreams and the visions that you need to have. Like, you know what I mean? You just have to have that. And that's what it should be. But I feel like Washington has everything that it takes to be able to become a championship team.
Yeah, no, that really resonates, because I was actually talking to, safety Quan Martin before the divisional round game, and he was telling me about some of the things that he had seen on tape and that he thinks he could take advantage of and to get a big interception in the game. And sure enough, he gets a big interception. And not only that, is but able to take it back to the house for a pick six. Obviously, one of the crucial moments in that divisional win. Looking ahead to this weekend, though, Vernon, where do you see is the biggest challenge for this Washington Commanders team as they get ready to face the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think the biggest challenge is going to be on defense. Being able to stop Saquon, those receivers. I think that's the biggest challenge. Offensively, they're clicking. Jayden Daniels is going to come out and be Jayden Daniels. We know that. Terry McLaurin is going to come out. He's playing like a man possessed. But that's definitely going to be the biggest challenge, special teams and defense.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then what's your prediction? It's a big game. Like you said, it's the Super Bowl before the Super Bowl. So what's your prediction for what's going to happen this weekend?
I think Washington will win by 2 touchdowns.
That is a big gap. That is a big gap. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Obviously, all my listeners will love it if it does. Vernon, I appreciate your time, man. I know you're busy living your post NFL life, doing the Hollywood thing. What's going on with you right now? What do you have coming up?
Coming up, we have a great project that I executive produced with my wonderful director, producer, Jocelyn Rose Lyons. Even brought my Super Bowl winning champion, my Super Bowl, one of my teammates who I won the Super Bowl with back in Denver, and Super Bowl 50, Omar Bolden. He's joining us on. It's about two tennis players who retire and start a podcast, but everything goes wrong. It's chaotic. It's a mockumentary comedy. It's extremely funny. I can't wait for everyone to see it. It's going to be on Apple and Amazon in February.
Hey, listen, getting into the podcast world can be an adventure. I can definitely attest to that. So I look forward to seeing that. I appreciate your time, Vernon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And that's going to wrap today's episode. Our next episode of Locked On Commanders, Louis DiBiase of Locked On Eagles and I will sit down for a crossover Thursday. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. To do that, all you got to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with some NFL espresso, and Tony Wiggins brings you back through in the afternoon for some real NFL talk. I am on with Tony Wiggins Wednesday afternoon on Locked On NFL. So if you want to check that out, head over there. It's the all new Locked On NFL. It's twice per day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through every day. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.